Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents From the Realm of a Dying Sun, Volume 2, 4th SS-Panzerkorps from Budapest to Vienna, December 1944 to May 1945, by Douglas E. Nash, Sr., narrated by David de Vries. Introduction. This is the second of 3 volumes which together trace the history of the 4th SS-Panzerkorps from its inception until the end of the war. The first volume focused on the activation of the Corps, its structure and organization, leadership, and the history of its 2 corps divisions, the 3rd SS Panzerdivision Totenkopf and the 5th SS Panzerdivision Wiking. It then traced the history of the Corps after its introduction to battle on 28 July 1944, its participation in the massive tank battle of Praga, its role in the 3 defensive battles of Warsaw, and ended on 26 November 1944 with the siege of Modlin and the transfer of the Corps to Second Armée. The first volume described some of the heaviest fighting ever witnessed on the Eastern Front, which forged the 4th SS Panzerkorps into a responsive and lethal instrument of war. This phase of the Corps' history, which began with its participation in a highly mobile, fluid battle, ended with its troops engaged in static trench warfare reminiscent of World War I. This second volume picks up at the end of November 1944, where the first left off, with the Corps still engaged in defending the so-called Wet Triangle, that tactically significant chunk of terrain situated between the Narrator and Vistula rivers. Seemingly relegated to a secondary front, the Corps was jolted out of its holiday preparations when the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, ordered it to begin moving by rail to another theater of operations on Christmas Eve. Thus would begin the final phase of the war in the East, with the Corps once again called upon to carry out one of the most audacious attacks of World War II, the relief of an encircled city. During the seesaw fighting that ensued, the 4th SS Panzerkorps, along with a large number of other German army divisions, sought in vain to relieve the embattled garrison of Budapest and to re-establish the old front line along the lower Danube. The final volume in this trilogy will focus on the last 3 months of the war, which witnessed not only the Third Reich's last large-scale offensive of the war, Operation Frühlingserwachsen, Spring Awakening, but the Red Army's Vienna operation, which drove German and Hungarian forces out of Hungary and deep into southeastern Austria, as well as the fall of Vienna. Volume 3 will conclude with a last-minute surrender by the 4th SS Panzerkorps to U.S. forces along the Enns River on 9 May 1945, and the post-war fate of some of its members. In the first volume, the author had access to the nearly complete war diaries of Heeresgruppe Mitte and the 2nd and 9th Armee for July until the end of November 1944, as well as those of SS Panzerregiment 5 and 1st Abteilung SS Panzerregiment 5. In drafting the second volume, he encountered a paucity of primary sources from units of the 4th SS Panzerkorps due to the destruction of official records at the field army level and below for the period encompassing December 1944 until the end of the war. Ironically, the Kriegsarchiv, wartime archive of the Waffen-SS in Zesmuk, had reprimanded the Corps' 2A, its adjutant, or chief personnel officer, on 16 January 1945, for his failure to submit the Corps' annual historical report and all of the related material, such as its war diaries, records of tank assaults, etc., for archiving. Involved as he and the rest of the Korpsstab were at that time in the relief of Budapest, it is understandable that Sturmbannführer Karl Willi Schulze failed to meet the deadline. But one wonders what happened to all of the Corps' historical material, or whether it was delivered to the Kriegsarchiv der Waffen-SS at all. Consequently, with a few exceptions, the author has had to rely on a number of secondary sources, some of which are unit histories written after the war by participants in the campaign, while others, such as Christian Ungvary's The Siege of Budapest, 100 Days in World War II, were composed by military historians using such records that survived the war. The primary sources consulted for this book include an electronic copy of the War Diary, or Kriegstagebuch, KTB, of Heeresgruppe Süd, or Army Group South, Führungsabteilung, Operations Section, the headquarters responsible for planning and coordinating German operations in Hungary, which covers the period from 1 February to the end of March 1945. Heeresgruppe Süd was the higher headquarters 2 levels above the 4th SS-Panzerkorps, so it primarily concerns the actions and activities of the 3 to 4 German and 1 Hungarian field armies under its command, and not individual corps. Therefore, events happening at the lowest tactical level of the division, regiment, and battalion have been filtered somewhat by the need to simplify and reduce the amount of information being sent from frontline units up the chain of command. The KTB used includes 3 separate sections: the summarized daily KTB, the Meldungen, daily reports of the subordinate armies and other major subordinate units, as well as various command-related Befehle, orders, other reports, troop strength, armor strength, proclamations, and so forth, totaling thousands of pages of documents. Another source recently uncovered in the Germans' record cache in Moscow and published online by the German-Russian consortium Deutsch-Russisches Projekt zur Digitalisierung deutscher Dokumente in Archiven der Russischen Föderation, also known as the German Documents in Russia website, includes several hundred pages of captured reports, situation maps, and messages from Armeegruppe Balk, 6th Armee, for the entire months of December 1944 and January 1945, leading into the first week of February 1945. Unfortunately, this hoard of documents does not include its KTB, but instead incorporates what was usually included in a separate annex to the KTB in a folder normally titled Meldungen und Befehle, Reports and Orders. Still, it is an extremely valuable resource because it includes weekly personnel readiness reports stating each unit's Kampfstärke, as well as armored vehicle and anti-tank gun availability with Armeegruppe Balk 6th Armee, including Hungarian units. This cache of captured documents also includes the complete daily intelligence reports compiled by the 6th Armee 1C staff officer for the entire month of January 1945, which provides a detailed, day-by-day description of the operations carried out by each corps under its command, including the 4th SS-Panzerkorps, as well as the air situation and assessments of Soviet plans and activities. In this manner, it is similar to the 1A KTB, though not as detailed or as comprehensive. Another equally valuable resource contained within this archive are the full-color daily situation maps in either 1 to 200,000 or 1 to 300,000 scale, maintained by the Armeegruppe Balk 6th Armee 1A from 28 November 1944 until 31 January 1945, that depict the location of all the units under its command, including Hungarian units, as well as the position of the German front line on any given day. Some maps also depict suspected locations of Soviet units and the directions of their attacks. While this proved to be an invaluable source, it is unfortunate that information for December 1944 and January 1945 was all that survived intact. In toto, this records grouping proved to be an invaluable source that contains many documents submitted by or pertaining to the 4th SS-Panzerkorps for the month of January 1945 that would have been destroyed had the Red Army not overtaken a portion of the Armeegruppe Balk 6th Armee's staff caravan transporting them before the war ended. Another long-overlooked primary German source has recently become available thanks to the efforts of Mr. Perry Pirek, who referenced the 4th SS Panzerkorps in his own book, published 24 years ago, Hungary, 1944 to 1945, The Forgotten Tragedy, Aspect Books, 1996. Written in December 1981 by the former Chief of Staff of the 4th SS Panzerkorps, Manfred Schönfelder, this account, Einsatz der Verbände der Waffen-SS auf dem Kriegsschauplatz in Ungarn in der Zeit vom 1,1 31. der März 1945, Actions of the Units of the Waffen-SS in the Hungarian Theatre of War from 1 January to 31 March 1945, is a 22-page manuscript based on his post-war notes that was written as a point-by-point rebuttal against accusations leveled at Hermann Balck, the former commander of Armeegruppe Balck, 6th Armee. In his memoirs, Order in Chaos, Balck makes the case that the 4th SS Panzerkorps and its commander were responsible for the failure to relieve Budapest, and not Balck's own defective leadership. In addition to setting the historical record straight, Schoenfelder also provides an excellent daily account of the Corps' activities during this same time frame, shedding additional light upon a period of the war not generally understood in the West. In addition to Mr. Pierick's work, several other works stand out in their thoroughness of the coverage of this phase of the war, with particular attention being paid to the role played by the 4th SS Panzerkorps. The first is an eyewitness account written by the late Georg Meyer, Drama between Budapest and Vienna, the final battles of the 6th Panzer Armee in the East, 1945. This excellent work of military history covers the campaign in great detail, focusing on the period from the end of December 1944 until the end of the war. Meyer, a Kriegsakademie-trained general staff officer and the former 1A, or operations officer, of SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Armee, was a friend of fellow Kriegsakademie graduate Manfred Schoenfelder. As such, Meyer was in a good position as a general staff officer to observe the events as they unfolded from an operational perspective. Consequently, his work is primarily concerned with the actions of 6th Panzer Armee and neighboring units during this final phase of the war. But the 4th SS Panzerkorps receives its fair share of attention, especially concerning the controversy between Generals Balck and Gille during the 3 relief attempts of Budapest, Unternehmen Konrad 1-3. Buttressed by no fewer than 130 appendices, most of which consist of reproduced contemporary documents as well as 30 original maps, this immense study, appearing first in German in 1984 and translated into English by J.J. Fedorowicz Publishing in 2005, is absolutely essential for anyone desiring to study the war in Hungary in general and the role played by Hitler's elite SS divisions in particular. Another extremely useful primary source is the contemporary personal diary kept by the O1, Assistant Operations Officer of the Viking Division, Obersturmführer Gunther Janke. As an aspiring General Staff Officer himself, Janke was being groomed to become a Division 1A someday after he had attended the Kriegsakademie. Possessing a sharp memory and the self-discipline to continue making entries in his diary until the end of the war, Janke's account is extremely invaluable in helping the historian understand what was going on behind the scenes in the division's leadership circles, adding details that often escape the drafting of official reports submitted up the chain of command. Another important primary source is the personal notes kept by Obergruppenführer Gille himself, although his name is found nowhere on the document. For years, it resided in the Viking Division's Truppenkameradschaft, Veterans Association archives, which were donated to the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg several years ago. Based on the formal style of writing, the Old World, early 20th century military terminology used, and the perspective that could only have been held by a senior officer in command, including referring to himself in the third person, a number of Waffen-SS historians consulted for this volume agreed that the only person in a senior-level position that could have written this document was Herbert Gille himself. Although only 4 pages long, it covers in shorthand form the events experienced by the 4th SS Panzerkorps from 24 December 1944 to 30 March 1945, with a large gap appearing between that and the last entry of 8 May 1945. Especially valuable are the personal insights he provides about contemporary events and details of operational matters. A companion to Gille, Meyer, and Janke's accounts is the final volume of Wolfgang Woppersal's Soldaten, Kämpfer, Kameraden, the magisterial 6-volume history of the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf, an 8-year project that began in 1983. Like Meyer, Wuppertal frequently references the Heeresgruppe Süd war diary, Soviet sources, and existing records of the Totenkopf and Wiking divisions, as well as hundreds of individual accounts by surviving members of the division. Volume 5B, which the author consulted extensively for this book, traces the history of the division from the fall of 1944 until the end of war, when it was handed over en masse by the U.S. Army to the Red Army as prisoners of war, an ordeal from which many of its men did not return until the release of all former German POWs in 1955. Wuppertal's account remains to date the most detailed and factual description of this controversial division, which outgrew its concentration camp origins and developed into one of the most lethally effective divisions in the Waffen-SS. Another groundbreaking work frequently referenced in this manuscript, written from the American military perspective, is the transcript of proceedings from the 1986 Art of War Symposium conducted by the U.S. Army War College's Center for Land Warfare, From the Vistula to the Oder, Soviet Offensive Operations, October 1944 to March 1945. Consisting of a series of presentations and lectures delivered over 5 days during July 1986 to the faculty and student body of the War College, it featured guest speakers from the former Soviet Union, Great Britain, the United States, and no fewer than 10 former officers of the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS then serving in or recently retired from the Bundeswehr, who had been participants in the fighting in and around Budapest and Vienna. This work, the third volume in a series studying the war in the East from 1941 to 1945, covers in detail the fighting in Hungary, Poland, East Prussia, and Berlin, comprising the final phase of the war in Europe. Brilliantly directed and edited by noted Sovietologist Colonel Retired David M. Glantz, the proceedings from this seminar, incorporated into an 803-page masterpiece, contain 416 maps, charts, and organizational diagrams that make it invaluable for the study of the final phase of the Red Army's operations against Nazi Germany. The copies of actual Red Army daily situation maps depicting the actions and unit locations of the divisions, corps, and armies of the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts, as well as German units from October 1944 until the end of the war, are definitive and allowed the author to verify the accuracy of contemporary German operational maps. The other work frequently cited in this work is Norbert Schamweber's The Sword Behind the Shield, A Combat History of the German Efforts to Relieve Budapest 1945, Operation Conrad 1, 2, and 3, the English-language edition that was published in 2015 by Helion and Company after first appearing in Hungary 2 years before. A thoroughly researched and documented study, the author brilliantly illuminates the heavy fighting that ensued when 4th SS-Panzerkorps carried out its 3 relief attempts of Budapest, followed by the initial February 1945 Soviet counteroffensive that occurred in the wake of the Germans' failure to relieve the city. As much a study in tactics, technology, and command and control as it is a history of the fighting, Schamweber displays his extensive knowledge of German, Soviet, and Hungarian source material, which he puts to good use in telling his story. Though not a unit history of the 4th SS Panzerkorps per se, Schamweber's work is a must-have for anyone seriously attempting to study in detail the operations that unfolded during the first 5 weeks of 1945. In this work, he has provided a wealth of information and analysis about the 4th SS Panzerkorps, which is unavailable anywhere else. The works by Pirek, Meyer, Glantz, and Schamweber have been frequently consulted during the drafting of this book, and the author is indebted to all 4 in crafting this history of the 4th SS Panzerkorps. Another recently published study that devotes considerable attention to the Budapest operation, which the Red Army designated the battle's official title, is Alexei Saf and Maxim Kolomit's Tomb of the Panzerwaffe, The Defeat of the 6th SS Panzer Army in Hungary 1945, translated and published in 2014 by Helion. A product by 2 Russian military historians, The book's primary focus is the defeat of Sepp Dietrich's 6th SS Panzerarmee after the failure of his Frühlingserwachsen offensive in March 1945. However, in Part 1 of the book, the authors set the stage for Germany's last offensive on the Eastern Front by describing over the course of the first 7 chapters how the relief attempt of Budapest by the 4th SS Panzerkorps and the Red Army's strong reaction to it created the necessary conditions for the much larger battles that were to follow in its wake. Drawing upon numerous contemporary Red Army accounts, including the war diaries of the Third Ukrainian Front and that of its artillery commander, the war diary of the 4th Guards Army and those of 3 other field armies, the 26th, 27th, and 57th, and finally the war diaries of 3 separate mechanized corps, 18th and 23rd Tank Corps, and the 1st Guards Mechanized Corps, all of which played key roles in defeating Unternehmen Konrad 1-3. This should be a mandatory reference work for anyone attempting to understand the battle. Though it is written from the perspective of the Red Army, it is even-handed and free of communist-era jargon, and is noteworthy for its cold-blooded evaluation of the results of the various engagements between January and March 1945, as well as lessons learned to be applied during future conflicts. Lastly, the translation of the Red Army's General Staff study written during the final phase of the war in Hungary is included in the Budapest Operation 1945, an operational strategic study, published in 2017 by Helion and Company, now available in English. This 1945 dated study, number 21 in the Red Army's Zbornik Materialów po izuczeniu objawoń series, collection of materials on the study of war experience, is a critical, relatively unvarnished account that is often at odds with the official story presented by the propaganda organs of the former Soviet Union. It also includes a 1957 internal publication issued by the Red Army's General Staff Academy, the Third Ukrainian Front's operation in the Budapest Operation, written by Major General S.P. Tarasov, which details the efforts by that army group to block the 3 German relief attempts of Budapest, especially the fighting to stop Gille's 4th SS Panzerkorps. While the Zbornik describing the operations to liberate Warsaw between July and November 1944 has yet to be published, this recently published translation of the Red Army's account of its Budapest operation proved to be a boon to the author, providing an insider's view of the internal workings of large-scale Soviet formations, whose armies, corps, and divisions proved to be the 4th SS Panzerkorps' last major and most formidable adversaries. Taken together, these sources provide sufficient details and information to reconstruct the operations of Gille's corps during the last months of the war, beginning with the relatively inactive month of December 1944, then its rapid transfer to Hungary, its participation in the relief attempts of Budapest, positional warfare east of Lake Balaton, its role in the last major German offensive of the war, Unternehmen Frühlingserwachsen, and the various delaying actions it fought during the last 2 months of the war as the 4th SS Panzer Corps and other German formations fruitlessly attempted to block the Red Army's entry into Vienna and beyond. In this volume, Hungarian names of towns, villages, and terrain features are used as much as possible, though German names for major Hungarian cities are used unless otherwise noted, such as Rab, Győr, Gran, Haran, and Komorn, Komarum. English names for major lakes and rivers are also used as appropriate, such as the Danube and Gran rivers and Lakes Balaton and Valenza. The reasoning behind this decision is that German armed forces during World War II almost exclusively referred to locations using updated versions of Austro-Hungarian maps, which used German-language place names, except for instances when the German and Hungarian place names were identical. In some cases, after each initial use of the German place name, the modern Hungarian equivalent immediately follow, so that anyone using current maps to trace the course of the fighting should have no difficulty in locating the same locations today using online tools such as Google Maps. While many of those who provided assistance in the drafting of the first volume have already been mentioned, several additional historians who have helped exclusively with this volume also deserve to be recognized. First, I would like to thank Perry Pierik of the Netherlands, who generously shared a copy of Manfred Schoenfelder's detailed monograph about the 4th SS Panzerkorps' role in the relief of Budapest. The original document, which at one point was in the Viking Division's Truppenkameradschaft, Veterans Association archives, has since been lost. I would also like to thank Norbert Schamweber of Hungary for his help, as well as that provided by U.S. Army Colonel retired French McLean and Lieutenant Colonel retired Mark Reardon. I would also like to thank Charles Trang of France and Mirko Byrel of Norway for their generous help in providing photographs depicting the combat operations of Gille's Corps during the closing days of the war. Mr. Byrel, probably the world's most knowledgeable expert on the course of the 3 Budapest relief operations, was especially helpful in freely sharing additional material he has collected during his research into the operations of the Viking Division in Hungary over the past 30 years. Among other items he has shared with the author, including the personal diaries of participants such as Manfred Schoenfelder, Gunther Janke, Willi Hein, and Manfred Rentz, he also shared additional maps and original documents. He has also walked the ground several times where many of the key actions occurred while leading staff rides of the battlefield for foreign military historians. Through Mr. Byrel, the author was introduced to Viktor Uchov, a resident of Rostov, Russia, who translated a number of captured German documents, including operations orders and communications of the 4th SS Panzerkorps, that have never before been translated into English. I would like to once again thank Oberstleutnant der Bundeswehr retired Gunther Lange, former Begleitsoffizier, aide-de-camp of General Gille, for his continuing advice and encouragement. He has also been extremely gracious in sharing the contents of his considerable archive with me, without which there would have been many gaps in my narrative. Throughout this process, he has been extremely kind and patient with my many requests for information and clarification in regards to original documents as well as photographs. Along with the help of his son Wolfgang Lange, who conducted all of the translation and served as a go-between for his father and I, his assistance has been simply invaluable. I also want to express my thanks once again to those stalwarts who have been behind me all the way in this process, including the crew from Casemate Publishers, especially David Farnsworth, Ruth Shepard, Daniela Lipscomb, Isabel Fulton, Tony Walton, and Felicity Goldsack. In addition, I would like to mention the continuing assistance of Herbert Ackermans, Tom Albright, Christian Ankerstjerne, Christoph Avenda, Predag Blanusa, Martin Block, Geir Brendan, Prit Butar, Carol Byrne, Andrew Found, Tim Hassler, Justin Horgan, my mapmaker Tom Houlihan, Petter Yellender, John Moore, Tommy Nattedal, Kamen Nevenkin, Roland Pfeiffer, Mark Rickmanspool, Remy Spezzano of RZM Publishing, Bram van Stralen, Victor Uchoff, Jan-Hendrik Vermeulen, Hans Weber, Lennart Westberg, Lars Westerlund, Ian Michael Wood, David O'Keefe, and Jess T. Lukens. My thanks to you all. Lastly, I would like to thank my wife Jill for her support and encouragement throughout this 5-year process. The many days and hours spent downstairs in my bunker while working on this manuscript meant that we both had to forego several vacations, weekend getaways, and other activities that we normally pursued, all sacrificed in the course of this project. Throughout the past several years, including recent months of isolation while the coronavirus raged unabated, she has been my rock and guiding star, always there for me, and with a ready cup of coffee or a glass of wine when I needed it. I would never have finished this without her. I owe you big time, Jilly. Douglas E. Nash, Sr., Washington, D.C., June 2020. Chapter 1. The Lost Month, 27 November to 27 December 1944. Despite their numerous and occasionally heated disagreements over tactics and Soviet intentions, General der Panzertruppen von Lüttwitz and Obergruppenführer Gille parted on good terms. The Ninth Armée commander greatly appreciated the contribution that 4th SS Panzerkorps had made to the successful defense of Warsaw and was genuinely sorry to see Gille and his men leave. In recognition of their accomplishments and sacrifices, von Lüttwitz issued the following proclamation upon their departure. To the 4th SS Panzerkorps. As of 26 November 1944, after nearly 4 months of service, you will know...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?